Welcome to the Decentralized Opportunity Podcast. I'm your host, Tanner Lytle, here with your other host,
Wyatt Carson. Tanner, it is my absolute pleasure today to introduce someone who I have worked with very closely in my day job and someone who I believe is an expert in the Agile project management and change management sphere. I want to introduce Craig Oliver. Craig Oliver is a business agility consultant with expertise in project management, project to production transformation, and focus based solution. He fosters agile ways of empowering teams to perform at their best. And I personally have worked with Craig and can attest to his incredible intellect. And I'm really excited to hear about some new trends that are going on in agile and project management. I think this guy's the best guy to tell us.
Well, thanks,
So,
Wyatt, for
thank you, Craig.
the introduction. No,
Yeah.
appreciate it. Again, I think, like you mentioned, I've met you through our day jobs previously. I was at Turnberry with yourself, and I know you're in that change management space, and there's a lot of overlap with the agile world, be it product delivery, transformational change, agile coaches. And I think, a lot of buzzwords are thrown around. A lot of people think they know what they think they know, but at the end of the day, what is all of this stuff, right? Like, do you have to have special events, ceremonies, right? It's like you have to put on a special hat and go to a ceremony on a Zoom call to be agile, or is it more of a mindset, right? I mean, is it actually a way of doing things? And I think, leading into this conversation, I think sort of some conversations we had before we started recording, like what exactly is the future, right? I mean, for the audience here, like, be it if you're an entrepreneur, if you're interested in learning more about project delivery, program delivery, where do you need to look? And I think that's the key thing is, you know, coming out of manufacturing in the second half of last century, there was the whole rise of Six Sigma, lean manufacturing, and a lot of that led into, through the militarized industrial complexes where the sort of field or discipline, I would lean into the word discipline more than field, though some people call it a field of project management, came out of essentially taking many pieces of delivery items that needed to be structured under that triple triangle of, cost, time, and people. And how do you get that done, right? So now, over time, we've moved into this whole agile area where it's more so you're taking inputs and creating outputs. And the outputs are nice, but it's like the outputs need to then scale up to an outcome that actually adds value to something. So I think that's where there's, questions, I think, around the whole industry at wide, be the specialized agile industry, and even, among pockets of industry leaders who hire on, vendors and talent of what are they looking for in future deliveries, and how agnostic do they want to be in what they deliver, because if they follow a particular methodology, is that hindering where they go? And I think the really important thing is understanding your customers. And right, I mean, you learn quickly that lots of people think they understand the customers that they have, but they don't always do that. So I think, the key here is agile heading to what lean Six Sigma was, where it might plateau somewhere, and is sort of, and we can jump into this with some questions here in a second too, but is agile sort of being trumped by sort of more of a product delivery model of, something else, and sort of the buzzwords have sort of peaked, and where are we going from there, I think, is the key question that I can hopefully shed some light on.
My my first thing too, I'm curious. You were talking about the original things with lean going back with history. Were those were created a lot for physical goods, and then is agile created more for digital assets, things like software stuff? and created for those things, or and that's where its power is in its development, or is it also applicable to the, traditional types of items in creation as well? I'm curious, like, why was Agile created and what is its benefits compared to these older school disciplines?
Yeah, so the Agile Manifesto came out of the world of software development. So um, this is back at the beginning, of the 2000s. So now it's on, over 20 years, but it's exactly what you're saying, Tanner, is it's out of that world of the intangible digital, the product as, if you go back to the words, the Scrum Manifesto of the developer, the product owner, and the Scrum Master, right? It's very, you know, technical. It's very focused on software. There's, the most recent change to the Scrum Guide occurred in 2020. There was even talk then to get the word developer out and switch it with a contributor because, in all honesty, it's a mindset. And I think the problem is certain people within the Agile community aren't necessarily pushing that it's a mindset. I think there's, a lot of people who've only been in that software development world, but in terms of the theory, it's applicable to things outside. Now, that's where I think you have to be more focused on the actual outcomes of, right? Like if you're a marketing company, your product would be what campaign you get out. I mean, there's even places that, 3D printing companies and other, emergent companies in manufacturing that their end product might be, some sort of new digital asset or something, or something that has lots of components, but it is truly applicable outside, and it's not merely something in software. It's truly something that has that value. But to the other point is, it's such a broad term that, and I've encountered this at many different places, right? A lot of people think, oh, agile, that's what the software team does, and then they hand it off to us, and we do this in compliance and we do this in legal, and it's like, well, that's not actually agile. So that's where I think there's multiple ways to interpret what agile is and how far you can do it. You ask 10 different people, they'll give you 10 different answers, and that's why I think this is more of a discipline than a pure thing, right? It's like a discipline and it's a mindset in sense that you need to apply it, and then you're essentially applying it at the most fundamental core. You're applying agile projects and products to complex solutions in complex worlds. So that's really what it is at its core. So if you have a simple, you know, end product you're trying to create, let's say you're trying to make a peanut butter jelly sandwich, you could make it using the product mentality of every input you get unique times, you go through like a cycle, you go through a sprint and you make it. Or you could do more of a waterfall project and you could still get the same sandwich, but you go get one thing, then you get another thing, then you get another thing. That's where I think it's fascinating for me, is it's applicable in different areas, but you sort of have to take that initial leap and jump in, which is hard for leaders outside of software. And that's where I think the key is, you need people who understand the theory behind it and can kind of blend some of the language. And that's where I think the words of some of the agile community are now being taken up with. There is a trend to take more of a product centric view of things as opposed to an agile centric view, because I think agile has such a strong connection to not just IT development, but really to like software development of the last 20-15 years.
So I think we need to take a timeout. So Craig, I think we need to explain what is agile, what is waterfall. Like, consider our audience. I'm with you. I love what you're saying. I think a lot of people who aren't in the project management product industry don't understand the difference between agile or waterfall. So can you what is agile, and why is it the method that you choose and many others choose to manage projects?
Yeah, so taking the step back to waterfall versus agile, and essentially waterfall is sequential, you know, delivery of value. So it's sort of like you go talk to all your stakeholders, you get your requirements, you get your information, and then you start to build, and then you show them little pieces of value, and then you go to the next build, and then you continue down in a waterfall manner. So while stakeholders can see some progress, it's not a lot at the beginning, and as things change, there's going to be only a few things. So when would you typically use waterfall for something that is very regulatory or compliance heavy, something that's a very big project in terms of maybe a huge construction project would be keen on waterfall delivery. Now, contrast that with agile, which you could replace the word agile with iterative, and essentially you're creating something, showing it, some use the word fail forward or just fail fast. So you're creating some sort of value, showing it, moving on, showing it, moving on. And the benefits for that are essentially if it's a complex solution that you're trying to solve, you get the value quicker. And in terms of feedback loops, you're increasing the feedback loop. So you're getting closer to the customer. In terms of how to use it, I would say, what that's one of the challenging things too, is it's like agile shouldn't just be the default. And you can take some of that theory of getting closer to the customer, and I think that's where the value is, right? Is increasing some of those feedback loops, actually getting customer data and incorporating that into what you're working. And I think the other thing that would contrast it is a waterfall project. You're very focused on documentation and following processes, where in agile you're focused more on an outcome that is tied to something that would solve some sort of need that the end user would have to solve a problem that they have.
So I think that reminds me of, so I originally went down the path for my PMP, which is a project management professional certification. In my opinion, one of the most complicated professional certifications to get. Not only the application, which is insane, but the requirements to do, have so many hours and blah, 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 blah. But I also found myself starting to feel that the strict stranglehold that this company had on project management professional certification, which propelled you into the stratosphere in your career if you were a project manager, it kind of limited individuals. I ended up dropping out of my PMP certification purely from the application process. How is agile any different? What is different between project management and agile? And what I like to use is the description of, and this is from my old army days, is break it down Barney style. What is project management and how is it different than agile?
Yeah, no,
Barney style.
I think bringing up the way that the certifications are set up is actually an interesting way to kind of do this. Like you're saying, so the PMP, the professional project management certification through PMI, you have to track your hours, show that you have either a certain number of hours based off of the education that you have. Then you can get audited for that. You have to take a stringent course for that. And honestly, the folks like Ken Schwaber, who helped to create Scrum, the Scrum guide and moved on and eventually created scrum.org, which produces one of the more accredited project or agile certification in the professional scrum master and the professional scrum product owner. Those courses, you don't have to audit your hours. You take a course and you're essentially using their interpretation of the way of the agile manifesto in projects and products, because you can use scrum in that way, and you take a test at the end and you get it. So I think that's the thing, is the key points coming out of the agile manifesto that differentiate it from a more waterfall, I'll say more PMP, I'll say, approach are they value people over processes. Like you're saying, a project management, someone who is purely in that project management background, they would focus a lot more on the processes. Now, when you say something over that, right, like they still care about the people, but the waterfall world would focus more on the processes. And also in waterfall, they would focus more on documentation than the end result. So they care more about, the CYA of get all the requirements from everyone, even if it's not someone key. Now in Agile, you're sort of, you know, getting closer and only focusing on things that are closer to the end event. Now, is that necessarily going to be best for every type of situation? No, but it's, you know, quicker feedback loop. So if you're going down the wrong path, it's easier to go back. And that's a way that you would use Agile. So it's really a way of honestly sort of decentralizing things from the project management world, where you're sort of a gatekeeper, like you're saying, even with trying to go through the process of, am I interested in this field? That's where PMs, a lot of times they are, right? Like they're controlling the scope, they're controlling the budget, they're combating scope creep. Now contrast that to the agility world, where if you're a scrum master, you are a leader who serves. Your value is to serve, and at the end of the day, help to create more value. If you're a developer, and again, the word developer can be interchanged with contributor. If you're contributing to the team, you're focused on inputting values that at the end of the day make the outcome better and more meaningful to the customer. And then if you're a product owner, and again, the product owner role may come out in, a business requirements gathering role or a business analyst role. If you're the product owner, your goal is to maximize the value of whatever you're working on, whatever product or service you're working on. So I think the key to kind of, wrap it up is it's really about command and control, which again, I think the thing too is, right, in certain circumstances, you want that waterfall command and control. You're dealing with something highly regulated. If you're dealing with something more iterative, you want more of an agile. And then a lot of times you're going to fall somewhere in the middle because you need some, but companies are increasingly moving more towards that agile, iterative delivery of focusing on the outcome, the value, and being a value maximizer.
So you mentioned that Scrum was created initially in the early 2000s and it was for software development and all these things changing. Well, that's over 20 years ago. Where do you feel that Agile is starting to feel a bit archaic or hasn't been keeping up in the times? Because on the podcast, we're talking a lot about a lot of these new AI technologies that are coming out and they're really revolutionizing things. There's all sorts of changes since 2000, with especially around remote work and how all these other stuff. Where do you feel like things are a bit deficient, and how are they evolving and changing to change with the times?
Yeah, I think in terms of stagnating, and I think again the next change of the Scrum Guide probably will have this change. Getting rid of the word developer, I think, will happen. The word contributor to kind of step away from that. Scaled Agile framework is honestly one of the delivery models of scaling Agile, and honestly, it's a little over the top, and it's sort of a way to kind of combine waterfall with Agile to get folks more on board with it. And I think at a great level, I think the biggest kind of place that may have this whole Agile stuff getting stagnant is focusing in on, like, Scrum events and, you know, cleaning up Kanban boards and stuff, and not actually focusing on creating iterative delivery. And I think it's easy because, right, like there's a daily stand up. Oh, we need to keep this meeting 15 minutes. And, oh, we have a remote world and half of our team is in India. I think just the whole complexities of remote work and dealing with offshore teams can be challenging if you're only focused on trying to fit a round hole in a square peg with, you know, what the Scrum guy says, right? Like, you'll come across some people like, oh, it's in the Scrum guide, you need to do that, right? And it's like, well, the Scrum guide is a guideline, right? And that's the thing, right? Is it's like all of this is a guideline, right? Like, this isn't saying, oh, you need to do this, this, and this. And that's where I think, and I've even heard, stakeholders come back with this is like, the team spends all of this time coming up with, story points, and they're like, oh, this is worth 5 points. That means nothing to me. What is the value? Can you show me the value of this? And I think that's the key, is like working to actually incorporate this mindset. Understand, first part, understand that it's a mindset. Second part, get it, fit within what your specific company is looking for. And third part is, and I think this is hard too, is like even understanding if, Agile is the right way to deliver things, or if there's some sort of hybrid approach where, I think a lot of companies will do that. And that's where I think they're using the word product as opposed to agility, because in some circles, I think the word agility is getting sort of bogged down as just like all this stuff that is just extra events, extra meetings and stuff. And it's not, if you do it correctly.
Yeah.
But
I took a course, IT leadership thing, and everyone around the table, they're like, "How many people do Agile?" And a bunch of people raise their hand, like, "Our teams run Agile," and they're like, "How many people really run Agile?" And they kind of redefined it as Agile-ish because of how,
agile-ish, wagile, there's all those terms.
yeah, because there's so many rules, right? It's pretty crazy.
And I mean, I think that's a problem, right? I mean, it's, you have, and I'll be the first one to say that I think some of it is the folks in the agile community siloing themselves of like, you know, uh, and this may be where I differ from some other folks, but for me, I mean, I think the first thing is you should constantly audit the way you're doing the work, right? Like, I mean, I've been involved with both waterfall and more agile projects, but none of them have been quote unquote fully waterfall or fully agile, right? They're all sort of on a spectrum, and that's where um, I think you need to be realistic with things. Of it's like executives don't care how many story points, which is just a way to sort of define the value of a particular feature. People don't care about features. People care about ROI, and is this actually going to add value to me? And I think that's where, and Lean Six Sigma did this too, like back probably about 25 years ago, probably right before Agile was really getting started. Right, is a lot of the practitioners, they took the courses from the same people, they got the foundational information, and they got bogged down in all the jargon. And jargon in theory is nice, but I like to say there's like Venn diagrams. There's how it is in the teaching, which you should learn, how it is that a pure practitioner would do, and then how it is that the actual company does, right? in the perfect world, it'd be in the middle, but you're constantly jumping around, right? And I mean, as consultants too, I know I've had this conversation at some communities of practice at Turnberry with when I was there, and with Wyatt too. Is it's like, we're supposed to be in the middle as consultants, but we're constantly jumping back and forth, and that's where the thing is, right? Is someone's version of agile. It's not a standard term, so it's like I think that, as you're saying too, with like heading into the AI and this disruptive technology, I think companies will make choices on what type of artificial intelligence and machine learning technologies they use and what type of delivery they use. And I think frequently they will use the word product delivery and product centric design as opposed to agile design as they move away from that.
So, Craig, you hit on something that has kind of been near and dear to my heart for a while. And I mentioned I previously explored the project management professional. I have my Agile or my Scrum Master certification, but each time I did these, something kept popping up, and what that something was the extreme desire to stick with the methodology. And whether that's project management, whether that's Scrum, whether that's Lean, whether that's Six Sigma, whether that's total project or total, total product management. There's a million methodologies on how to build things and make it better. And both you and I, Craig, have built our career off of methodologies. But one thing I've always found really, divisive is Scrum, especially in project management as well, extremely strict on following this methodology. You go from A to B to C to D to E to F, etc., etc. And I know you, Craig. You're an experienced consultant, and you've worked with many clients, many different companies. The real world does not always mesh well with the hypothetical educational theory that comes with a lot of product and project management. So I was wondering, can you tell me how you individually kind of accommodate that? Because I know a little bit about Six Sigma. I know a little bit about Lean. I know a little bit about product management. I know a little bit about Scrum. And I feel knowing all of these methodologies and techniques make me a more well-rounded business professional. Do you agree or disagree? Because one thing that always kind of irked me about Scrum, for example, Scrum being a software development kind of project management methodology that really focused on replacing waterfall. The problem is they really wanted you to follow a roadmap. Go here, then go here, then go here, then go here. Do X, then Y, then Z. How have you found the? Do you feel that some flexibility is available to you as an expert, or do you really stick to the methodology and the processes that are involved with this?
No, I first off, to your point on the being a polyglot, knowing lots of things, I would say to all the audience, yeah, definitely. If there's stuff you're not familiar with, even from this talk, or just want to dive more in, Scrum Alliance, Scrum.org, with the Lean Enterprise, some other places, definitely, I think that's key. Knowing this stuff, at least knowing the key from it. I mean, yeah, it's challenging, right? I mean, there's definitely, from what I've seen, is that people default on the key points because that's about all they know, and they don't really have a lot of knowledge, right? They may have done a test, and that's why I think that a lot of people, even in the industry, are slowly getting away from the word agile and putting in the word product, because I think product is a little bit more lean, and you can sort of wiggle room of, this is a mindset And that's where I think Scrum, right? Like we were talking about earlier, Scrum, it does this, and this. I mean, and I've even been in courses, right? Training sessions, and people are like, what do I need to know to pass the test? I've never thought that way myself. I'm always the more so the how do we take this information, evangelize it back to the team, and then go to stakeholders, because right, like, and that's the hard part, and that's the part very few people can actually do. Like, how do we both get the people on the ground to buy into it? Okay, that's usually a little bit easier. Then we need to get the executives. Okay, that's usually a little bit harder, but still, you can kind of show the return on investment. You'll probably have to tweak it a little bit, and then you're not quite following exactly. Then it sort of becomes that company or that particular area's flair of Scrum. And then I think the hardest part is the middle managers, right? Is they're the ones who have teams, and it's like when you're trying to change things, it can be challenging there. So that's where I think. I mean, in terms of myself, I utilize my training within the product mindset as sort of a holistic view, not just for my professional career, but my personal life too, and like outside of work of sort of, and it's not always going to be this, but it's like, is what I'm doing adding to the longer term goal? And that's where I think the industry is trying to do, right? Is first off, when I say the industry, I mean like the subset of like the actual agile trainings, like because agile like delivery or anything isn't really an industry. That's a discipline within other industries, but there is a whole sort of community of practitioners and groups, and right, rightly or wrongly, a lot of people latched on to that. Then those folks got hired at different companies, and much like PMP previously, some of the Six Sigma and other trainings, they just latched onto that and did that at their organizations. Now that's not necessarily rightly or wrongly, but it got stuff done, and I think now is sort of the next iteration of that, right? It's more of a how is this a mindset? And I think like you guys mentioned with the rise of hybrid and remote work, and with artificial intelligence coming in, it's sort of rife for some changes, right? People don't want to follow rigid sets, I think, of rules. People want guidelines, and that's where I've always found Scrum to be lacking the most. Is there's lots of rigid stuff, and then a lot of times it's, oh well, go talk to the team. And I've had lots of conversations with other product owners and folks as well, and that's one of the things is like, how do you know when to reach out to people, or what when the discretion is the product owner will reach out to, or the product owner will investigate. It's like that's when you need sort of leadership to be close enough to help and have you come in. And if you're not in a company, if you're your own entrepreneur, then you can sort of use the same thing of having advisors. And I think that's where the world is going with this whole, the world of product, I mean, is moving beyond rigid stuff, right? If you think about it, it was sort of getting this bought in by people who had done really long waterfall development cycles. They bought into Scrum, they focused all of that, and then now it's sort of like they're looking at what they got from Scrum, and it's like they got slightly closer to the end product, but now they're hearing about this product stuff, and that's sort of, I think, the next phase of it is the this is a mindset that's key, and let's kind of dive into that.
So something that a term that I always think of is shiny object syndrome, and I'm very susceptible to this. So I in the business world, so many times I see, and it's a huge frustration point for me, where you get higher up leadership who hear about this great system and all these potential great outcomes, but through all the processes, new rules, all the training and all the requirements, all it does is seem to take focus off of the end goal, which is serving the customer or whatever the main mission of the business that actually drives it to make money is. What are some of the pitfalls you've seen companies who fall into that and don't implement things well? And how are certain ways that you found where companies can actually find success and make it a net positive rather than just being kind of a burden to a lot of the rank and file who are going like, well, I guess I'm going to a stand up now every day compared to whatever meeting they were doing
Yeah,
before.
yeah, no, I think, yeah, this shiny object is for sure. I mean, I would say starting with the pitfalls and then sort of leading in with the end for some areas where I think there are chances for, some growth and less pain in the future. Pitfalls, I would say people not, not understanding, people just throwing meetings on and it's like repurposing this stuff with like that purpose. And I think that's definitely a pitfall, is people not understanding and not inviting the right people, and like you're saying, they're following the rigidness of things. I think in terms of when you were talking about executives buying, certain training things, I thought of like SAFe, the scaled agile training, right? Scaled agile training has like release trains and they're supposed to scale up multiple teams to support something, which is in theory good, but if you actually follow what SAFe has, it's very complex and rigid. So like if you actually follow that, right, you're having your people focus on studying the theory of something, which is taking them away from, like you were saying, the end customer. And I think that's the thing, is it's like when you bring in instructors somewhere and they're not focused on kind of continuous learning, I think there's a gap in the marketplace of continuous learning slash advisory. I think companies, I think starting with, from what I've seen, more of the middle tier and more companies in the research and development area, they are wanting more continuous of, hey, this is a mindset. This is not, only one way to do something. How can we get someone either embedded as a consultant or someone as an advisor to reach out to, quarterly or monthly or something to talk through something? Because I see the only way where, obviously there's still always going to be the shiny syndrome, right? I mean, I think that's even going to be more so with, all these new technologies coming from AI and whatnot. How do you understand what, these academics or these former practitioners who are now trainers or something, how do you take that information and tie it to my company? And I think if you have the right type of leaders who can buy into that and spread it to the team, then you can do that. Now, right, like that's the pie in the sky perfect world that doesn't exist. So what do we hope for? We hope that you can get a mindset where you can get to a point of some sort of continuous learning where in terms of that, the thing is going to take the theory, not just focus on that, but get an end result that is meaningful. Um, but again, I think there's always going to be some, you know, people in an organization who just sort of run to the big thing, learn it, and then, I mean, I've seen multiple companies go down like, oh, we're going to do scaling all this agile, and then they look at it and a couple leaders complain about it, and they just don't want to go through it, or there's some sort of funding issue, and then they go back to square one and everybody just like is upset and then people leave. So I think trying to get it into more of a mindset is where I think the key is, which is hard, right? Changing minds is one of the most challenging things you can do.
Yeah, I just see it so often where the intentions are good, but the execution is poor. And there was something I read that talked about like keywords on LinkedIn profile pages and stuff, and strategy and strategist is like one of the top 5 most used keywords on LinkedIn. But if you look at like execution and operator or different things of actually like fulfillment based things, they don't even rank in like the top 1,000 or something like that. So it's really easy to strategize, but it's really hard to actually execute on the stuff is the whole point of that. But it just feels like, especially the further down the line you are on the rank and file, it's hard to actually like keep up, not just keep up with the changes, but add them on to the things that you have been doing. And then when those get changed, like learning the new ways of getting things done. And at the end of the day, serving whatever your role is to the maximum capacity, which is in most cases, servicing the customer. Um, can you go into that change management and kind of like what that is and how that implements? I know that's a big thing for companies doing a lot of like different types of transformations, whether it be in the processes, product lines, technologies, and the way they do things, and actually trying to get adoption. Because again, so many people in the workforces feel like these high level strategies are often more of a headache than they are something that they would want to go through. And I know change management is supposed to kind of aid in that.
Yeah, no, I mean, the first thing I think of is it's like, how many project managers does it take to change a light bulb? One change request, right? You're gonna, only do something when it goes through the system. I mean, a lot of my experience has been in some more regulatory and compliance things. So I am very passionate about doing the boring things right. I mean, Freakonomics had a really good episode on maintenance and like sort of why, you know, running subways and maintaining things, all of the boring stuff that we never think about is so important and adds so much value. I think that's it. And I mean, the way that I sort of frame that up is you can't do all the really cool, fun stuff, the innovative stuff, if you don't have customer onboarding, if you don't have a good legal team, if you don't have a good HR team, if you don't have processes through that.
Yeah, good
And
AR, AP,
yeah,
the
I mean,
lifeblood of any business.
and I think you need to be realistic. Like the best companies that I've seen, the people in those, the HR folks, the support folks, they know that side of the business, but they also know what the people that they're enabling to do their jobs, they know what they're doing, and that makes them even better. And I think that's the key of the change management that is successful is being realistic, right? Like we are, a lot of times when you bring in, a new change management team or consultants or some sort of leader, it's getting information that's not just, cut and paste, right? A lot of people want to, have something written for them and then they push it out. That's, get get the information in your writing as a leader and sort of evangelize it out, right? So that alone takes a certain type of leader. So I think transformational leadership is crucial for any type of change. And that's hard. Not everyone can do that, not everyone wants to do that, and not everyone has a place of psychological safety where they're able to actually do that. I think back to, a lot of times when you see something fails is it's not one, massive thing that fails. It's a bunch of little things. It's like the plane that goes down. It's not that there's one thing that happens. It's that the crew, it's the first time they're flying together. They're not super late. They're like 20 minutes late and they're trying to catch up time. The weather's not awful, but it's a little bad, right? It's like, you know, you go through change, and I think just acknowledging that change is hard. A lot of times people don't do that. And I think that's a pitfall. You need to talk through why it's hard and how you're going to get through it. And if you don't get through it, that's okay too. But getting to a place that's better than where you started. Because I think a lot of times change management is not successful merely because people don't put in the time and effort in terms of being realistic that they have an end goal. I think a lot of people throw out terms like, oh, we'll get this new technology and it will solve all of our problems. We don't have to deal with the people. And then you get a new technology, you don't have the right logins, you don't have, you might have the technology, but it's not on the right sort of device. It might be that, you need a mobile interface and you haven't designed that yet. So I think just being realistic about getting to that end goal is so hard. I think transformational leadership, and like you said, Tanner, like execution so hard, right? Everybody has all these ideas, and then you know, like what they do in the improv world, the yes and, right? It's like yes, and how will you do that, right? In improv comedy, you say your line, and then you say and the other person says their line, right? And the business world, the strategy people come up with all this fun stuff, and then they just sort of say and dot dot dot. They don't have anything, and it just sort of stops there. And I think that's where there's pitfalls.
Yeah, like you mentioned, there's so many times that they just don't want to deal with the people portion of it, and they do a lot of these projects or implement technology so they don't have to, I don't know, deal on such a personal level or on such a one-on-one level. A lot of times they're like, "Oh yeah, you just follow the rules, or you just do this thing." Earlier in the podcast, you mentioned servant leadership, and I know that's something that's big in the agile world, and it's a very different mindset than a lot of traditional leadership. Can you kind of talk about what is servant leadership and the whole kind of concept around that? Because I think that's a key part of this.
Yeah, so servant leadership actually in 2020, the most recent Scrum changes, it's to a Scrum Master is a leader who serves. So servant leadership is essentially saying that, and again, the roles are essentially accountabilities in Scrum. So this is not specific to that. And like we've even mentioned earlier in the podcast, this doesn't have to be to a rigid rule or anything, but a servant leader, a leader who serves, is someone who is able to really at the core, and this is again where I think, in whatever type of work you do, understand what is it that you're doing. At least have some sort of elevator pitch of what your role as a contributor to a bigger project is or product, and how that does. So if you understand that at its core, then you can come in as a servant leader and you can say, hey, this is the end result that we need. We're here. And you can identify, be it coaching or assistance, or maybe someone is going to be out on paternity leave or something, and you need to move around schedules or stuff, right? It's really focusing more on not really the waterfall command and control type of leadership of, you know, managing costs, managing scope, but servant leadership of managing the people around you to enable them to be the greatest that they can be.
A big thing that I've been dealing with recently, just in my personal life, that's similar to this, is I've been trying to think less of the I and more of the we in everything that we do or that I do. Because it's so easy to get caught up in what's in it for me, how does this affect me, or what am I going to have to do in this situation, and all this stuff. And with servant leadership in particular, and I'm guessing, with a lot of these processes and stuff, because it's so team oriented, it's everything is the we mindset. So when something comes up, it's okay, how does this affect us? How does this, how will we handle all this different stuff as a unit, as a whole thing? And it's been a very productive thing in my life and a very centering thing because you kind of take yourself, the personal aspect out of it. But I can see the benefit for sure in a business because, again, when you get a bunch of egos in the way, that also seems like a potential failure point.
Yeah, I like the I as this accountability, as this person on the team, added this to the greater, you know, I mean, product outcome solution. If you're planning an event, that picnic or event or whatever, and this was the end result. But yeah, I mean, right, like it's egos are always going to get in the way, and I mean, I think that's the thing, right? Is no methodology, no way of structuring work, no, you know, particular team is going to totally miss egos, conflict, stuff like that. It's more so getting closer and just sort of being more realistic about things, and that's where I think this is heading, right? This is a mindset, this is a way of thinking and handling things, as opposed to oh, we're going to eliminate all of this stuff. This is a way to get complex things done in a complex world, and that's where we all live in professionally and personally, right? It's a very challenging, divergent times. There's lots of exciting stuff, but it is true that it is a complex time that we find ourselves in.
Are there any other areas where you're really seeing things heading? Um, and what are those?
I mean, not to be like everyone, but definitely, I think how this is going to play in with um, artificial intelligence. I attended a virtual conference last week, and I think some interesting points out of that were sort of how coaching and the human side can really scale up with, if technology can automate a lot of the, you know, tracking of time, you know, meeting schedules, budget, some of the stuff that takes up a lot of time is necessary but can be automated. How teams can restructure and focus more on strategy, and then I think the most challenging part is, will using tools like AI to do some of the tasks that aren't as sexy, for a better word, in terms of just like being tracking financials and whatnot, will that turn into better execution? Can people focus more on executing? um, and then I guess in terms of something for myself that I'm curious to see. Again, I've worked with many global teams. I think that's a trend that's only going to continue to happen, especially um, in terms of, many multinational companies have many partnerships with companies or vendors that are offshore. Um, I think there's lots of potential for increased output and opportunities there, if you work through with the teams. And then in the change management space, I see corporations continuing to do mergers and changes. And I think for me, just I think a lot of talented people are going to make the choice to become more entrepreneurs of their own. And I want to see how that sort of happens. And if people can take, some of the agile ways of working into their own business ventures, be that a full-time venture that they consult or do something, or they have some project on the side that they do. And I'll be curious to see just how, a lot of people coming up now, agile is really the only type of environment they've worked in. um, how they'll iterate and will their change, and how they may push back against some of, like, I'll say, the more rigid events and stuff that don't necessarily add as much value. And I think the key is going to be, will this, plateau? Will this kind of be like what Lean Six Sigma did, and it's still visible but not quite? And do we pivot more into a product view, or does Agile reinvent itself, kind of incorporate the product, and still stay kind of at the cutting edge of iterative delivery?
I can think that reminds me of kind of like the art scene back in the day where everything was so rigid and it was done by like a royal academy, and all these rules were to be followed, and what a good painting was following all these specific steps. And then you got the pre-Raphaelites who came through and they just threw the rule book out, and they had kind of their own little cohort where they made their own stuff and broke the rules. And that was really the evolution that led to a lot of modern art and different things to go there. So I could for sure see, these
Mm-hmm.
rigid systems and all the ceremonies and all the specific things you have to do. But as a lot of these AI tools and things enable teams to get more leverage with each contributor, perhaps you could only need a handful of people and you don't need all the rigidity, and then you get this weird kind of kit bashed impressionistic view of how to utilize this iterative mindset. I think that would be a really neat
Yeah, I
evolution to
think
it all.
art is a great analogy for that. I mean, right? Like, you had all these guys, and it was predominantly guys back in the day, but pushing back against these, rigid, like you said, funded academies that wealthy donors funded for. Now it's sort of like, okay, there's all these, structure that we have. We know we still need structure. Even if we break away, we'll still need some structure, but we know there's some tools. How do we make it that the tools that we have, right? Like, you know, the tools can't just be thrown in the equation and all of a sudden it changes things, right? Like, probably it will scale down the number of people, but it will create new jobs. People need to retool. And, I think you need to embrace that as if you are going to be successful, you need to learn, stay up on the foundationals, right? The fundamental skills of the theory and the business practices, but also definitely, I think that, you know, how can these tools be used for my particular industry and my particular discipline, you know, whatever that is for yourself. But how can you take AI and these other tools and, add them to your toolkit so you're not left behind?
Yeah, I mean, just the stuff we're seeing already is pretty crazy, and you can just start to see the application. I know Microsoft is including it within Windows and the Office suite, and so every recording or every Teams call you have, all your documents and everything can be sourced and will give you meetings and help you write your emails and do all that stuff. So that just, again, relieves a lot of the burden of energy that you need for the more mundane tasks to focus on the specific things that you can do. And then I even saw, I got an email actually for, there's a company, Rewind, that is coming out with a pendant that you can do, and it'll listen to you and then start summarizing all of your conversations and different activities throughout the day. And so you can go back and reference what you were doing, which is kind of scary and a little dystopian,
Yeah, I
but
mean that
a little fun.
definitely the whole regulatory, and then right. I mean, so many questions there, but definitely usage. There's
Yeah.
definitely lots of useful things like
Yeah.
that.
But yeah, I really love that the term redefining things into contributor, because what we have once defined as a very specific role for somebody, and maybe they could have only done one or two roles, I think will really divulge down into people doing a lot of different ones just because of the capacity within the technology
Yeah, I
and
think
just the, yeah.
to me it's a mindset thing, right? I mean, like many things, I think, right, when it was built up, it was very specific in software development. It was, they were not rigid with it, but then it turned into, through different teachings and whatnot, and instructors giving courses on things, it did end up becoming more rigid. And um, over time, as it becomes a mindset, I'm hopeful that, if it's not even like the quote unquote mainstream, or if it's only certain pockets of companies and companies taking things on, that it's more of a embracing of this mindset of, I'm a contributor to a bigger process or product or service, and I know how I fit in, but I also know how the other members of the team fit in.
Hmm. Absolutely. Well, and the thing I used to always say was I sold managed technology services before the job I did now, and one part of my sales pitch was like every company now is a technology company because technology is so prevalent, irregardless if you'd mow lawns or you actually develop software. But the things that I'm seeing now with the accessibility with things like no code, low code, and these new AI tools to help with development, I could really see a larger swath of companies who traditionally weren't software companies actually somewhat in regard become that, because they'll create their own solutions for their own systems and maybe incorporate that into their products that they sell to customers too. So again, having the right discipline, methodology, and mindset with it all, will help them scale a lot quicker and a lot further and have less pitfalls ultimately.
Yeah, I think be it, what information companies decide to include in their, you know, artificial intelligence and machine learning systems to rate what type of methodology, what type of hybrid methodology and tweaking to their, own specific industry they use is going to frame how they can solve things. But at the same point, I think a key thing is, right, if you look at like the end of last century, right, like GE tried to buy all this stuff and use Six Sigma, and the Jack Welch and yeah, okay, do all this stuff and be everything to everyone. Now I think the key is be, a particular thing to a particular subset of customers. And if you can, have some folks on the reaches of that you might not have necessarily thought of, but know who your core customer is. Like, there's so many podcasts out there, but you need to understand who your audience is to keep engaged with them. There's so
Mm-hmm.
many websites out there. You need to know. I think, not being everything to everyone is probably a way that the product mindset can fit in to help places stand out and above, and maximize where they stand in the market.
100%. And the way we're going with how accessible, again, these technologies are going to be, there's going to be so much disruption. And Wyatt and I have talked about this a ton because there's a lot of concern that the incumbents, unless you have things like regulatory capture or things that don't allow an actual like open market, you will have some upstart be able to come take out some core feature of an incumbent and do it at a 1000x less, scale or cost. And that's one of the really neat things that's coming from it. And there's a ton of opportunity. And then you mentioned the ability to work with people all across the world. That's actually where we get the decentralized opportunity portion of our podcast name, because I live in the middle of nowhere and I'm able to work, with people in metro areas in an age now that only a few years ago I never would have had access to. So, I mean, we're really hitting the stage now where you can be anywhere, work from anywhere, work with anyone from anywhere, and work as though you were just the next office over, almost equivalently. So I really think we're heading to a new paradigm now with so many of these, how we're going to be doing business, and having that right mindset and knowing whether you're starting a company or you have a company, how to structure things to make yourself move forward competitively, but also smoothly to keep and retain the best talent. Because that's the other portion too, is people have a lot of options and they'll move around if they can.
Yeah, right. It's like if you can work everywhere now, it's the whole, as some places have had people come back to the office, it's the whole, some people are just self-selecting themselves out from companies like that because they want more flexibility, and the technology exists there. The opportunities for lots of folks exist there to either, you know, not work for someone else and be an entrepreneur, or find a company where you can sort of shape your own career and be more of an entrepreneur within that company. And I think a lot of people are using that as a chance to get skills within companies and kind of have the mindset for the future to sort of either go out on their own or do something on the side. And I think the technology is definitely there, and companies, I think, need to realize that a lot of people have choices, and a lot of the top talent are the ones that do have choices, and want that flexibility more so than other folks.
Yeah. Well, it's so hard to get the top talent. Top talent is so expensive. So you want to make sure you're actually getting the maximum amount of output from them as if you can. I mean, if you're putting someone into a system, let's say you do hire someone who's the top 1% of the type of candidate you can get, why would you want to bog them down with all this bureaucracy of processes and things that aren't actually advantageous to getting the most from them? And that's one reason I do really like the iterative approach, and especially what you've been talking about, how it is getting a little bit less formal and rigid and more flexible and dynamic based off of the needs and changes of the people and the products and the circumstances. You'll be able to iterate quicker, improve your product quicker, and hopefully grow your business and find more success by doing that at whatever scale, right?
Yeah, and I think part of that is just as it's spread out to different industries and different even different geographic areas, honestly, as more people have bought into some of the iterative stuff, folks have been able to tailor it to specific use cases and case studies outside of just software development, and be like, hey, we're an agriculture business, but we loan to these companies and these farmers, and we can be more you know quicker to market if we include this technology here. So I mean, um, I think that's great, right? I mean, it's like I'm all about how the iterative mindset and delivery can make work and make delivery and make things less painful, right? I mean, you know, I hate when like myself or I'm around someone and they got their phone out and they're like, oh man, I'm so stupid, I can't use this. And it's like, no, you're not stupid. Someone on the development team and someone, right? It's like this button should work. And it's like, you know, the best apps and the best delivery of stuff like that is where it's seamless and you can just kind of flow through the system. And I think that's what iterative and kind of having that product mindset's all about, is just like seeing a problem and like wanting to have a solution come from it, so it's easier not just for yourself but for everyone around.
Absolutely. Well, Craig, Wyatt had to jump off. We had a little text group here that he had a weather emergency, so hopefully there's not a tornado in Omaha or something crazy. But I really appreciate you joining. I learned a ton about Agile and different things here. Like I said, I knew just a little bit enough to be dangerous, but you've really helped kind of solidify some additional information around there. Where can people find you online?
I am on LinkedIn. Just search my name, Craig Oliver. Craig P. Oliver is how the LinkedIn handle comes up. That's the social media that I'm most active on. So if you guys do have any questions, feel free to connect with me. I'll be happy to message, answer any questions you guys might have. And then I will plug to scrum.org. They have lots of good blogs. They have, I think, very helpful videos as well. So if you're curious about this stuff, feel free to go over there. Feel free to reach out. I can provide some other links. But thanks for having me on, Tanner. And yeah, hopefully everything's okay over in Omaha for Wyatt.
Yeah, we'll give him a call here, make sure that he's okay. But yeah, thanks for joining us, and thanks for everybody who's listened and made it this far in the podcast. We will see you all next week. Bye bye.